Queen Eleanor of Varen was young, clever, and beautiful. People said her crown shone brighter than the summer sun, but Eleanor did not care for gold and glory. She had spent half her life in the palace, surrounded by people who bowed when she spoke, but whispered when she turned away. They called her wise, and she was, but wisdom could not keep her warm at night, or make her laugh like she once did as a child. The palace was full of jewels, yet it often felt empty. That changed on the day she met Caleb. Caleb was a simple man from a small town beyond the river. He worked as a builder, repairing bridges and barns, speaking to no one unless spoken to first. When the royal carriage broke one morning near his village, he was the one who stepped forward to help. Eleanor, who rarely traveled without guards and servants, found herself alone with him as he repaired the wheel. She had never met someone who spoke to her without fear or flattery. "Your Majesty," he said softly as he wiped the grease from his hands, "you should sit in the shade. The sun is cruel this morning." Eleanor smiled despite herself. Most men tried to impress her with fancy words. Caleb simply wanted to protect her from the heat. For days afterward, she could not stop thinking about him. There was something different about this quiet man, the calmness in his eyes, the strength in his hands, the way he looked at her as if she were not a queen, but just a woman standing beside a broken wheel. Months later, when she traveled again and passed near his village, she asked to see him. Their second meeting was no accident. They spoke about simple things: the harvest, the sound of running water, the stars over the hills, and Eleanor felt her heart light for the first time in years. Rumors began to spread when she returned to the palace. The advisors did not like that the queen was seen speaking to a commoner. They warned her that such closeness could ruin her image. But Eleanor had always listened first to her heart, and only then to the voices around her. Slowly, against all warnings, she began to visit Caleb again. He never sought wealth or position. Sometimes he would bring her wildflowers, or tell her stories about his people and their struggles. His words were plain, but his heart was honest. He did not try to win her with gifts or promises. He only gave his time, and that, she realized, was rarer than any jewel. When she finally announced their marriage, the whole court fell silent. Some smiled to her face but laughed behind closed doors. Others whispered that she had gone mad. "A queen marrying a man with no title," they murmured. "He will never understand her world." But when Eleanor looked into Caleb's steady gaze, she saw a truth that no crown could hide. He understood her in ways no nobleman ever could. Their wedding was small. There were no grand parades, only the quiet sound of church bells and the faint scent of rain on stone streets. Many nobles refused to attend, insulted by her choice. But outside the palace, the people cheered. They loved their queen even more for choosing someone from among them. Life after the wedding was simple but peaceful. Caleb did not like expensive gifts or fine clothes. He preferred walking through the gardens, helping the workers, and speaking kindly to the servants who often bowed too deeply in his presence. Eleanor loved those moments when the crown was off her head, and they could just sit together under the apple tree behind the palace, talking until sunset. And yet she sometimes noticed a shadow in him. There were nights when he would wake from terrible dreams, his face pale, his breath heavy. When she asked, he would only shake his head and whisper, "It is nothing, my love." There was more to him than he let her see. He carried something quiet and heavy inside him, and though he smiled each morning, his eyes sometimes looked older than his age. Still, he never spoke of his past. He didn't boast of battles or travels or deeds. The people of the palace soon forgot their gossip and accepted him for his calm dignity. To everyone, he seemed an ordinary man who loved an extraordinary woman. But to Eleanor, he was her calm in a stormed world, the only person who could make her forget she was queen. As years passed, their bond only grew stronger. Yet deep inside, unseen and unsaid, the truth of who Caleb really was waited like a sleeping giant. The queen had everything she could want: peace in her heart, love in her home, and trust in her husband. She did not yet know that one day, that quiet man would rise above all she thought possible and show not just his heart but the true strength that lay within him. That day was still to come. But even now, when the candles burned low and the wind whispered across the corridors, sometimes the queen felt that the man at her side was much more than he seemed. Days in the kingdom of Varen seemed peaceful after Queen Eleanor's marriage to Caleb, The people were happy. The fields were green, and the rivers shone like silver threads through the countryside. The queen worked hard to make life better for her people, and Caleb stayed close, always quiet, but always watching carefully. He was not a man of fancy words or fine manners. He spoke slowly and simply, yet every word felt true. Servants trusted him. And even the guards who first doubted him came to respect the way he treated everyone the same, whether they wore silk or rags. But peace never lasts forever, and far north of the borders, another land began to watch Varen with cold eyes. The northern commanders were jealous of Eleanor's growing power. They saw the rich grain of her fields and the shining trade roads that crossed her lands, and greed began to stir in their hearts. They whispered among themselves that a queen with no husband of noble birth could never defend her throne. Weeks before winter, a message arrived at the palace gates. It was sealed in red wax and carried by men in dark armor. The letter was short but sharp. The northern king wanted tribute half of Varen's gold and harvest each year, or his army would march. When the letter was read aloud at council, silence filled the great hall. Eleanor's advisors looked uneasy. They spoke one by one, voices shaking. One said they should agree to pay and buy peace. Another said the army was not strong enough. The memory of past wars still haunted them. Only the queen's voice stayed calm. "If we pay once," she said, "we will pay forever." Still, behind her steady words, fear began to rise. The army was small. The palace was strong, but not strong enough to face such an enemy. And she had no allies left who could come to her aid in time. Caleb had been standing quietly behind her chair through the meeting, as he always did during such councils. He did not speak or show emotion, but when the meeting ended and everyone had left, he walked to her side. "You are troubled," he said gently. Eleanor nodded and laid the letter before him. "They mean to come for us. I have ruled with peace, not war. Now I must find courage again." Caleb studied the words silently. He looked out through the tall windows, where snowflakes began to fall slowly from the gray sky. "Peace," he said after a long pause, "does not live in the crown or the law. It lives in people's hearts. You have given them hope. You will see. They will stand for you. But if they won't," she asked softly, "if they are afraid?" He turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. "Then it will be up to those who still remember what it means to fight for what they love." There was something in his voice she had never heard before, strong, deep, and filled with quiet promise. That night, the queen could not sleep. She walked the stone corridors, listening to the sound of the wind around the towers. In the courtyard below, soldiers were sharpening blades and repairing shields. The smell of iron filled the air. When she looked toward the western gate, she saw Caleb standing alone, watching the town beyond. For the first time she saw him not as her gentle husband, but as a man who carried memories too heavy to speak of. His hands, usually calm and patient, were clenched at his sides. There was strength there, hidden under the stillness. By morning, scouts brought more bad news. The northern army had crossed the border. Fires burned in the far villages. People were fleeing toward the capital. Panic began to spread. Some advisors wanted the queen to escape to a safer place, but Eleanor refused. "I will not abandon my people," she said firmly. "I will face this here." Caleb looked at her, admiration and concern shining together. "Then we will face it together," he said simply. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Messengers ran across the city. Soldiers were called from every nearby village. Men and women came to offer food and shields. For the first time in years, the palace gates stayed open for everyone. Eleanor stood before the people in the main square and spoke from her heart. Her voice carried in the cold wind, reminding them of who they were: farmers, builders, mothers, fathers, but also a people who would never bow to tyranny again. Many of them cried. Some raised their hands and shouted her name. It gave her strength she thought she had lost. Behind her on the platform, Caleb stood quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd with the sharpness of a soldier's mind, though none knew it yet. That night, after the speeches and plans were done, Eleanor found him again by the garden walls. "You look like you have seen war before," she said softly. He looked up at the stars. "I have," he said. "And I have seen how people can lose everything, unless one person reminds them they are worth saving." Then he turned toward her, and she saw a glimpse of power in him that took her breath away. It was not the power of title or command, but of will.
Eyes.
Something in him waited, patient and certain, like fire hidden in stone. Eleanor suddenly realized that the quiet man she had married might not be as ordinary as he had seemed. She felt both fear and trust in equal measure. In the distance, the first sound of enemy horns echoed across the frozen hills. The war for Varen had begun, and the queen's heart raced not only with dread, but with a new, mysterious hope. The sun rose weak and pale on the day the war reached Varen. A cold wind swept through the fields, carrying the smell of smoke and fear. From the high walls of the capital, Queen Eleanor looked out and saw the long line of enemy banners stretching like a dark river toward her city. Her heart trembled, but she stood tall before her people. Below her, soldiers moved quickly, forming lines and checking weapons. The courtyards were filled with noise shouts, clanging metal and the rattling of wagons. Yet over it all, one question hung in every mind. Could they truly stand against such a mighty army? Caleb walked among them, calm as always. He wore simple armor, nothing grand or polished. But when he passed by, the soldiers felt something stir in them. There was confidence in him, something steady and unshakable. He spoke to them, not as a king, not even as a commander, but as one of them. "Do not fear what stands before you," he said quietly to a group of men near the gates. "We fight for our homes, for our families, for the ones who count on us. No army can take that from us." Word of his calmness began to spread through the camp. Men who had been shaking picked up their spears again. Women who carried water to the front lines smiled when he passed. Eleanor watched this from the balcony above. She could see the way her soldiers looked at him, the way even the hardened captains nodded with new respect when he spoke. Something had changed. Her husband seemed to light a fire in hearts that had grown cold with fear. When the first arrows fell, the battle began like a storm breaking. The ground shook as the enemy surged forward. Drums thundered in the distance. The air filled with dust and cries. At first, everything looked hopeless. Enemy's army was larger and better armed. Their numbers seemed endless. The Queen's forces were pushed back from the outer fields. Some soldiers began to flee toward the city walls. Eleanor stood beside her generals, trying to keep her voice strong. Every message from the front brought news of loss. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the stone wall. For a moment, she felt the weight of her crown press heavy on her head. Then Caleb appeared through the courtyard gate, walking calmly despite the chaos. His eyes were sharp and unmoving. He climbed the stairs to where Eleanor stood. "It is time," he said softly. "Time for what?" she asked. "Time to remind them who they are," without waiting for her reply. He walked down to the soldiers gathering near the central gate. He mounted a black horse, a gift from the stables he rarely used, and rode out before the weary troops. The army fell silent as he raised his voice. "People of Varen," he called across the roar of battle, "this is our land. We built it with our hands. We fed it with our sweat. We kept it safe through storms and hunger. No one will take it while we still draw breath." His words spread through the ranks like fire through dry grass. The soldiers raised their swords and shouted back, their fear replaced by fierce pride. Caleb turned to the front line and charged straight into the enemy advance. His skill surprised everyone. His sword moved quickly, not with wild strength, but with purpose and control. He fought like a man who had done this many times before, and each time his blade struck, another soldier of Varen found courage to stand taller. Even the enemy began to falter, shocked by the sudden energy of those they had thought broken. The battle that seemed lost began to shift. Eleanor watched in awe. The gentle man she had known now moved like lightning and flame among soldiers. There was nothing of the simple builder in him now. This was someone else, someone with years of battle behind him. When her general asked who he truly was, Eleanor could only whisper, "He is my husband." As the hours passed, the city's defenders began to push the enemies back toward the northern fields. Trumpets sounded from the towers. News spread that the Queen's forces had regained ground. Still, the cost was heavy. The courtyard filled with wounded, and rain began to fall as evening came. Caleb returned at last, his armor dented, his face lined with exhaustion. He stood before the Queen as the last thunder of battle faded in the distance. "You never told me you could fight like that," Eleanor said, half afraid, half proud. He smiled faintly, his voice low. I wanted a life where I would never have to fight again. But when I saw our people running, I remembered what I once fought for. Peace means nothing if we can't protect it. There were no cheers, only quiet relief, as the soldiers tended to their wounded. The first day of battle had ended, and Varen still stood. Eleanor looked at her husband and realized she still did not know the full truth about him. Somewhere in his past were battles and scars he never spoke of. But tonight, none of that mattered. He had saved her people when hope had nearly died. As the rain fell and washed the blood from the stones, the queen felt something growing between them, stronger than fear, stronger than any crown. It was trust, deep and enduring. She looked out toward the battlefield where the fires burned low. Tomorrow would bring more fighting, but tonight she knew one truth. Her husband was no ordinary man. He was the heart of Varen Unan, the reason it still lived. Night had passed slowly after the first great battle. The capital was quiet, but behind the broken walls, the pain of loss was everywhere. Fire still burned in the distance where the enemy had retreated, and the smell of smoke and rain hung heavy in the air. The people of Varen tended to the wounded by torchlight. The queen moved among them, speaking softly and helping where she could. Her golden crown was gone. She wore a simple cloak, her hands covered in dust and blood. Caleb stayed beside her, silent as always. He helped carry the injured soldiers from the gates to the courtyard and spoke calm words to those who cried out in fear or pain. None of the people called him their hero, yet every eye followed him with gratitude. They knew that if not for his courage, the city might have fallen. When the last fires were out, Eleanor returned to the Great Hall to meet her generals. They were tired and worn. Some of them had bandages around their arms, others limped as they walked. Maps lay across the table before them, covered in marks and symbols. The enemy has not given up, said one general. They are camped beyond the river, gathering more men. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. We must be ready before they strike again, she said. We cannot wait for them to surround us. The generals looked uneasy. Our soldiers are tired, one of them whispered. If they attack again so soon, we will not hold. Caleb stepped forward. Then we must make them believe we are stronger than we are, he said quietly. Every head turned toward him. Let them think our courage is endless. Fear is a weapon, just as sharp as any blade. They listened in silence. Though his words were simple, they carried weight. The queen nodded slowly. She saw the spark in him again, the strength that came from something deeper than training. When the meeting ended, the queen asked him to walk with her. They stepped out onto the terrace, where the sky was still dark but stars began to fade. I have asked you many times about your past, she said gently. You always turn away, but now I must ask again. Who are you truly? For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes looked far away, toward the shadowed hills where the enemy campfire lights still flickered. Then he spoke. I was once a soldier under another king, Caleb said. I saw men die for pride and gold, saw good people lose everything because someone wanted more land. When the war ended, I left the sword behind. I swore I would build, not destroy. That was the day I met you. Eleanor felt her heart ache. And now you are forced to fight again. I do not fight for power now, he said softly. I fight for you and for the people who still believe in kindness. That is the only war worth fighting. She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. The man who never sought glory had become the light her people followed. 2 nights later, the enemy marched again, came faster this time, hoping to crush Varen before its people could recover. Horns sounded through the valley, and the ground trembled under thousands of boots. Caleb had prepared for this. He had trained new guards, repaired parts of the walls, and gathered small teams to ambush the enemy as they crossed the river. He used no great machines or secret weapons, only clever plans born of patience and knowledge. When dawn broke, the battle raged once more. The enemy attacked from several sides, shouting and striking hard, but they soon met traps in the forests and hidden archers behind stone ridges. Every time they thought victory was near, Caleb's plans forced them back. From the tower, Eleanor watched as smoke covered the hills. Her chest was tight with fear, but also pride. She saw how her husband moved across the field, leading men twice his age with calm courage. His voice carried like a steady drum among the chaos. As the day went on, the sun broke through the clouds. The enemy's banners fell one by one. At last, when their commander saw that his army could not break through, he called for retreat. The valley went silent, except for the cheers of Varen's soldiers echoing across the hills. Caleb did not raise his arms in victory. He walked slowly through the field, checking that every wounded man, friend or foe, was seen to. When he returned to the city gate at sunset, Eleanor met him there. "You have done more than any captain could," she said softly. "You have saved us again." He shook his head. "I only reminded them what they already had inside: courage, hope, and love for their home." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Then that is the greatest strength of all." That night, the city bells rang to celebrate. The people gathered in the square, their voices lifted in songs of relief. Torchlight danced on the palace walls, and laughter returned for the first time in weeks. But while others rejoiced, Caleb stood apart on the balcony, watching the stars. The queen joined him and took his hand. "Do you regret picking up the sword again?" she asked quietly. He looked down at her, his eyes full of calm light. "No," he said, "because this time I fought not to destroy but to protect. That makes all the difference." The city below glowed with warmth and peace. Yet deep inside, Caleb knew the danger was not entirely gone. Darkness often returned when hope grew bright. Still, for now, Varen stood strong. And the queen rested beside the man who had taught her and an entire kingdom what true strength really meant. The winter air over Varen was cold and still. Snow lay across the city like a white blanket, hiding the scars of war. The people worked together to rebuild walls, mend roofs, and repair what had been broken. Laughter slowly returned to the streets, and chimneys smoked again in every house. The fear that once haunted the kingdom began to fade. Queen Eleanor walked through the markets each morning, her cloak pulled close against the cold wind. Wherever she went, people bowed and smiled. They called her the brave queen, who stood beside her people when others would have run. But many whispered something more in admiration: the quiet name of Caleb, the man who had fought beside her and saved them when all seemed lost. Caleb did not seek praise. He joined the builders, repairing bridges and homes, working as he once had before he entered the palace. His hands, though scarred from battle, were steady and strong. He helped farmers clear the snow from the roads, carried supplies for the soldiers, and visited the families who had lost loved ones. When people tried to thank him, he only nodded and said, "I did nothing alone. You all stood beside me." To Eleanor, he was no longer only her husband. He was the reason her kingdom still stood. She watched him every day with growing pride and love. The man she had once thought simple had become something far greater than she could have dreamed. Gentle and fierce, kind and brave, humble and unbreakable. But trouble does not always come from distant lands. Sometimes it grows close to home. In the palace, a few nobles were restless. They envied Caleb's fame and the people's love for him. To them, it was an insult that a man of no noble blood held the respect of soldiers and kings. They whispered in shadows, spreading tales that the queen was under his influence, that the crown was weak because of him. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the tall windows, Eleanor's advisor came to her. "There are those who question your husband's place beside you," he warned. "They fear his power." Eleanor looked toward the door where Caleb had just left to check on the guards. "His power?" she said with quiet calm. "His power keeps this kingdom alive." Still, she knew whispers could turn into danger if left unchecked. She decided to show everyone not only her faith in her husband, but also his heart for the people. The next day, she ordered a great gathering in the square. When the people arrived, she stood before them with Caleb at her side. The soldiers stood behind, banners waving gently in the cold wind. "My people," Eleanor said, her voice clear across the square, "we have faced dark days together. Many said we could not stand, but we did. Many said we could not win, but we have. And the reason is not magic or luck, it is courage born from love." She turned to Caleb. "Some say strength comes from crowns and swords, but true strength comes from the heart of a person who will not give up. This man, my husband, gave his courage to us all." The crowd burst into cheers. Caleb, surprised and blushing, bowed his head, took her hand gently and said, "It is your faith, my queen, that gave me my courage. You believed in me when no one else did. Together, we showed the world what simple hearts can do. The people shouted his name, their joy echoing through the streets. The nobles who had whispered before went silent, their plans melting away like snow under sunlight. Eleanor's words had ended their doubt forever. Later that night, after the celebrations ended, Eleanor and Caleb walked along the palace gardens. The snow glittered under the moon, and their footsteps left soft marks on the white path. "Do you remember when we first met?" she asked with a smile. "You were fixing a broken wheel, and I thought you were the calmest man I had ever seen." Caleb laughed softly. "And I thought you were too proud to speak to a poor builder. But then you did. I saw something in you that I could not explain," she said. "Now I know it was the strength you keep hidden inside." He looked at her gently. "We all carry strength. Some see it only when the world gives us no choice but to show it." They stopped at the edge of the garden, where a small river ran quietly under a bridge. The moonlight reflected on the water, soft and pure. "In every story," Eleanor said, looking at the stars, "there is a moment when everything could be lost. But love and hope bring people back from the edge. You gave both to me, Caleb." He stepped closer and put his hand over hers. "And you gave me peace I thought I would never find again." They stood together in silence for a long time as the night wrapped around them. From the city below came the sound of music and laughter. The people were safe, and the kingdom was whole again. The snow fell gently, covering the world in white peace. Eleanor turned to him and said, "You have shown me what real strength is. It is not in power or crowns. It is in the heart that chooses to protect others." Caleb smiled faintly. "Then I am glad that my heart belongs to you." And under the pale light of the winter moon, the queen finally understood that she had not just married a good man. She had married the soul of courage itself. Varen would never forget the day when its queen stood tall. And her human husband revealed his real strength, not with pride or fury, but with love that moved an entire kingdom.